All right, so April 9th, 2019. Um, I've been in the process of like creating logos and schedules and all that kind of stuff for a YouTube channel and a podcast and all these new ideas that I have. But today I'm thinking a lot about Venus coming together with Neptune in the sign of Pisces. Um, and so I just kind of wanted to riff on that for a little bit, preparation for a YouTube channel be damned. Um, because it seems relevant, and I'm actually really intrigued right now because Venus in Pisces is one of my favorite astrological signatures. I have Venus in Pisces in my chart. I tend to correlate it with, transcendent, ecstatic bliss, spiritual love, um, feelings of all being one. And I think that I'm able to kind of hold those potentialities with a lot of grace and reverence because I also am intimately familiar with the more problematic sides of Venus and Pisces, which are, um, delusionality, especially in relationship, and boundarylessness to the extent where there is, harm that happens, idealization. So, paying attention only to who you think a person can be rather than like who they are showing themselves to be. And so as Venus is coming together with Neptune, which it does, well, I guess it's, once approximately every 18 months or so. Don't quote me on that. I learned something new about that. I learned something new about the mixture of Venusian energy, Venus energy with Piscean energy. And this time, what's really up is the Pisces connection with anxiety. And I've been kind of just mulling this over for the past couple days because I think that, all of the signs can have their own take on something like anxiety or narcissism, for example. I've been thinking about doing a series called Narcissism Through the Signs. But I tend to associate anxiety with Virgo and Gemini. And I do that because Virgo especially really just wants to get all the details right. So it's that process of like analysis and the monkey mind kind of chattering away, trying to get to something. Virgo energy is where we want to like take all the tools we've learned and be of service with them in some way. We want to put those tools to use. And then Gemini, also a Mercury sign, again has to do with that kind of mapping and the mental mind and the intellect. And so to me, that makes sense in association with anxiety, right? It's that kind of like the anxiety that comes from overthinking or getting stuck in our heads or the mental loops. But I've been thinking or experiencing, if we're being honest, more of an anxiety that doesn't seem to have an intellectual component to it, right? Like I'm not necessarily ruminating on things. I'm not telling myself stories, but my body is registering anxiety. It's the same feeling, just without the mental scripts. And so when I think about Venus and Neptune coming together in Pisces, I'm thinking about anxiety that comes more at an existential level or from the unconscious. So if I break that down into something a little bit more metabolizable, I guess where the riff goes is to a metaphor I often share with clients. I think I probably got it from a book. I'm sorry I can't cite my source. But it's talking about karmic complexes of the Piscean kind and equating it with a person or a soul who is standing on the edge of a cliff, the cliff kind of representing like the known world, the concrete world, right? You know that you have firm footing, and is looking out into the ocean or the abyss. That would be Pisces. I can't see like how deep the ocean is. The horizon line is far away, can't tell how far the ocean goes, but is contemplating the jump into that unknown, right? Into the abyss. And so there's that feeling of, existential terror or dread that comes up. What will this bring? Who will I become? There's a lot of unknown going on there. And so Piscean anxiety is more of that kind. Okay, so it's the anxiety that comes from the unknown or from unknown sources, right? That's kind of what I said that I was experiencing. But there's that existential component to it as well. And I think that, existential dread is something that has been relevant in our culture for some time now, but is probably even more relevant now. And if we look at that astrologically, it has to do with the mutable axis in general, so Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, Pisces, but we can whittle it down to the square between Sagittarius and Pisces. Sagittarius being that sign where I know, I believe, I see the truth. I've experienced life, and these are my thoughts on it in that big philosophical kind of like overarching way. And then in Pisces, we get that shaken out of us through something. Shaken's probably not the right word, but we come into contact with the actual truth, which is that everything is changing, nothing lasts, all truth is relative. And it's important for us in our lives to get in touch with that Sagittarian belief and truth. But when we rigidly adhere to it and it becomes dogma, that's when it becomes problematic, and that's where the ocean kind of comes up to engulf us, whether that ocean is death or something that proves our theory wrong or whatever, right? We always have to change. Maurice Fernandez's book on Neptune is called The End of Hope, the Beginning of Truth. And that kind of describes that movement between Sagittarius and Pisces. So existential crisis kind of comes when like everything that you thought was true or everything you were working for kind of like gets taken away or goes away for some reason. And you fall into that Piscean depth of despair. It's very different. So Pisces is a water sign, right? And it's very different than like Scorpio grief. Grief has all these like textures, and it's rolling and it's turbulent, and it has its like cycles and phases. Despair, Pisces, is deeper than that, right? And it can be flat, and it can lead to those questions of like, why am I even here? And in a society with as much shit going down as is in ours, this existential crisis can be a real thing, right? Like, why am I here? What is the purpose? What does this even mean? So we live in a culture where the shit's hitting the fan, but also many people don't have ways of making meaning. And whether or not meaning making is a scientifically provable need, as far as I can tell, humans have been trying to make meaning or trying to like orient their lives to their experience for many, 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 many thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, possibly. And so it is a vital part of us. We need to be able to make meaning and to connect to something that helps us to orient to our experience. And we're increasingly losing contact with those kinds of things. And so in some ways, Venus coming, around this cycle in Pisces, I've been talking about it as like doing a little bit of cleanup work and healing work since Chiron finally left Pisces. But there is something about that existential despair process in there, or existential anxiety. The anxiety of like, what am I working for? What comes next? What does this mean? Does it mean anything? Can I do this anymore? I mean, those are really deep contents, right? And so with this much Piscean energy going on right now, there can also be a tendency towards escapism. All right, so escape into alcohol and drugs, sure. Escape into fantasy worlds, escape into compulsive connection with an ego identity. I think that a lot of times the way this energy can come through is through escaping into relationship, right? Especially romance. Like now is a really good time in a lot of ways for like romantic connection. But it can also be a time where the boundaries are really blurred in our relationships. And so it's like, somebody comes in and you're just like, oh, I hear these warning bells going off, warning me of past patterns, but it feels so good. And also my life's kind of weird right now, so I want to escape into this. Or an old pattern or an old partner more overtly comes back in. Pisces Neptune can be a great time for healing that. healing whatever happened in the past. But it requires a really strong level of discernment. It requires a really strong level of self-awareness and like, what have I learned at this point in my journey and how can I apply that to this situation? Because there is this kind of like overarching temptation to escape into romance, chemistry, love, especially if it's providing an escape from, what's going on in life or from that existential anxiety. And something I started thinking about this morning, if I'm just kind of following that tangent, is there's this interview that Dan Savage did with Esther Perel. And Esther Perel is a couples counselor with some really profound ideas about infidelity and monogamy and all of those things. One of the things she talks about in that interview, which I believe was on NPR a couple years ago, is that I don't know that it's human nature to be in a relationship with God, but for many thousands of years, people did have that connection with God or a creator of some kind, right? And that was kind of the path of the mystic in a lot of ways. And mysticism is very much associated with Pisces. So that relationship with that, just falling in love with God and getting to know the universe and all of its existence and its cycles and its patterns and kind of having that, what we would call a romantic experience, romantic connection, falling in love with divinity and life itself. As that has kind of steps, gone to the background, right? Like we're in a more secular society now. That love of God, of the divine, of divinity, has been transplanted into our human relationships. And so Pisces does have to do with that projection. And in this case, it's the ways that we project God onto our partners who can't live up to that, right? Because they're not gods. And kind of how like our whole romantic mythos is around that notion that your partner can meet all the needs that were once met by your relationship with Source, your relationship with God. And I'm probably doing a pretty bad job of paraphrasing, but it's worth looking up. And it seems somehow relevant right now. And so, if I'm just going with like words to the wise for this conjunction, I think it's exact on the 10th, which is tomorrow. It can be a time for a transcendent connection, right? But it doesn't have to be with another person. It can, but use that discernment thing. But it can be a good time to do a little meditation. Like Piscean meditations for me, usually like I'll travel in my mind to like a spot with priestesses and water that I can float in and just kind of like release and let go. It could be a good time for that. Devotions to goddess, whatever that means to you, whether that's, your body or the earth or, whatever. But if that anxiety thing is coming up for you, especially the physical stuff, maybe do what you can to distract yourself. That seems to be what's working for me the most. I say that as I'm sitting here holding a giant piece of gold sheen obsidian. Grounding, whether that's sage or food or making sure you're drinking enough water. But if you have thoughts on Pisces and anxiety or what you're experiencing, please feel free to let me know. And hopefully I will be doing more of these little video shorts in the future. Ooh, and a little addendum. As soon as I hit the end button on that video, I remembered that I did want to say something about Pisces and being an empath. Because I think that's relevant to the anxiety piece too. I teach a class called Tools for Empaths. I'm very much into thinking about this archetype of empath. I also kind of have some problems with it because it's becoming this kind of like blown up thing and it gets very put into kind of like a lens of victimization. And whatever. I'm doing an 8-week class about that. But what I wanted to say here was that during Piscean times, especially if this is something, that is affecting your chart or just something that resonates for you right now, astrology be damned. Pisces and empathic tendencies are highly linked because Pisces is boundaryless. Okay, and so the basic idea here is that empaths are folks who kind of like sponge or absorb other people's stuff. And I know that as somebody who has done a lot of work with my own empathianism, I oftentimes am aware of other people's stuff, but it doesn't bother me, right? Like I'm able to at this point just kind of like identify it and either like keep it out there or like let it flow through me or whatever the case may be. During Piscean times, so when there's a lot of Pisces energy in the heavens or when something in Pisces or the 12th house in your chart is being activated, it can become a little bit more tricky. Okay, so like I started noticing maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks ago that when I would go ride the bus, I wasn't like my tools weren't working. I was feeling everybody's everything, or like I would be fine, and then I would walk into a crowded room and I would not be fine anymore. And so I started kind of tuning into the fact that I was headed down into a little empathic phase. And I think that when we are feeling more sensitive than normal, that is another time when anxiety can arise, right? There's also that unconscious aspect to it, that Piscean unconsciousness to it, that kind of like, why am I feeling this much anxiety? Right? And so for me, it's that kind of like at the mental level, I really want to be social right now, but at the like taking care of body and emotions level, I'm aware that it's exhausting me and I'm coming home with a bunch of other people's stuff kind of like rippling through my field and I am not enjoying it. So that's just another kind of like addendum for this little riff.